Yeah, leave it be.
So look, let's just hope. All right. So look, welcome everybody to this event. This event is named "When Men Hide Behind I'm Fine." It's something that's actually quite personal to me, but also it's International Men's Day, and it's something that I think that we need to talk about. Fortunately, my mate Dan Glyde has a little black book of some of the smartest, most respected blokes in this area, and I'm actually a little bit blown away.
I couldn't find any of them, Jamie, so I invited this lot along.
And
we're all busy.
Yeah. I'm going to allow these guys to introduce themselves because I won't do it justice. But the reason that we're doing this really is so that we can talk a little bit honestly about why men don't speak up and what maybe we can do to help them. My name is Jamie. I'm the founder of a company called ReechUs, which provides mental health services to organizations. I'm going to allow you guys to introduce yourselves. So Ed, would you be able to just give yourself, give the guys viewing a little bit of an intro into who you are and what you do?
Yeah, of course. Hi, everyone. Dr. Ed Rainbow. So I'm by background, I'm an NHS GP, but I now work exclusively with men looking at mental health, addressing it in a holistic manner. I also work with men with hormonal problems, low testosterone, and help them with that as well. So that's a bit about me. So get Andrew's next on my screen, so should we hand over to?
Oh, thank you. Well, Andrew. Yes. So I spend most of my time speaking and training, and a large part of my work is men's well-being. I was formerly in an abusive marriage, and that kind of got me into talking in this space. Got a podcast, Men on Show, got a book coming out next year. So, and I'm also a dad to 3 boys. That drives me in my work. And that means I'm a triage nurse, a war zone reporter, failing caretaker, run ragged, but they give me my inspiration. And that's why I do what I do. So yeah, if I throw it, Olu.
Hi everyone, my name's Olumide Ajulo. Call me Olu. I am a psychotherapist, so I manage the counselling service at Leeds Beckett University. I've also done a master's in psychology, and for my master's research, I did a paper on the socio-dynamic factors that affect men's attitude towards seeking mental health support at university. And also, it just so happens that during my training and in the work that I've done, I just happen to get mostly men, middle-aged to older men that I work with. So I come from this from a research perspective as well as sort of a clinical psychotherapy perspective. And I'll throw it to Paul.
Thank you. I'm Paul. I am the host of the Middleman podcast as it relates to today. So I started this podcast 18 months ago, coming up towards 2 years now, because I was going through stuff in my own personal life. And I have to say that the topic of this is about saying I'm fine. I'm as guilty as the next man of saying I'm fine, or at least I used to be. I think I've got a hell of a lot better. But for years, my wife would ask me, "You're right, what's going on?" "I'm fine, nothing," all that sort of stuff. So I have a deep personal experience of being that bloke, if you like. I've heard from well over 100 guys since I started this podcast. And maybe today we'll talk about some of the stories I've heard and the commonalities between all those. Dan.
Yeah, lovely. Thank you, Paul. So I'm Dan Glyde. I'm a peak performance coach, and I run an online men's community, which is called Positive Masculinity, which Paul is a very active member of, I'm happy to say. We have a private WhatsApp group. I run a monthly mastermind call, and I also do one-on-one coaching. So I've been doing one-on-one coaching with men for the last 3 years. I got into coaching because of my own burnout. Because for years, I hid behind the I'm fine. When I was pushing through, killing myself with no sleep, wearing stress like a badge of honor and thinking it was clever and tough. And I didn't even admit to myself anything was wrong. And when I look back, probably for about 5 to 10 years, I had chronic anxiety and stress, and it led to burnout. Thankfully, I was woken up by a panic attack one night on my doorstep. I thought I was going to die. I thought I was having a heart attack. And fortunately, I wasn't. But that made me realize I couldn't carry on living the way I was. And that meant I had to get really honest with myself about what was happening, what I was going through, and how I could fix it. And in helping myself, I discovered I had a process that worked, and so now I put that into practice and help and support other men.
Brilliant. Thank you all so much for introducing yourself. As I said, I've got the Avengers here today. It is kind of nice as well to hear that some of you, nice and not nice, to hear that some of you have said this phrase before, this "I'm fine." You've hidden behind it. It's something that I used to do a lot as well. I suffered with crippling depression in my 20s. It got very scary in my late 20s. It all, things got to a point where sort of split road sort of situation. And the weird thing was no one knew. My partner before didn't know, my friends didn't know, my family didn't know. They got the same answer that you guys were giving. I'm fine. I'm all right, And I don't get it. Why do we do it? Why do we do that thing? Why do we hide behind this little phrase or something similar? So that's kind of what I would like to talk about first. And I want to bring Andrew in to start this little conversation. I think we need to break down exactly why men use this. I don't know, armor, I guess, is a good phrase.
I think you could say it's armor. I would just say, so I wear my heart on my sleeve, but sometimes I say I'm fine. It's just a habit. It's not that I'm a repressed male. It's just like, I'm just not really thinking. So I do think that's part of it. But one of the things I remember, I was in a violent, abusive marriage. I know I referenced that. And I actually used to go to work with cuts and bruises on my face. And of course, my colleagues, this is the late 1990s, they'd say, "Hey, Andrew, what's up with your face?" And it was always, I didn't say I'm fine because it was quite a direct question, but it was always a shaving accident, falling over whilst drunk in the street. I had a whole list of excuses because I wouldn't have dreamt of telling them that it was my wife that was doing that. And I wouldn't have done for two reasons. And I think this is why a lot of us just say I'm fine and it becomes a habit. Is I think, number one, there wasn't psychological safety. That just wasn't a thing back in the late 90s. It was a fast-paced working environment. You weren't vulnerable. If you were vulnerable, then that might mean that you would be overlooked for a promotion. Nobody did it. So, and that's a people thing. That's not just a guy thing. Nobody was vulnerable back then in the late 90s. So that was set for me as a model. You just shut up, play hard, work hard. That's what men, women, people were doing back then. But I also think on top of that, there was, as I refer to it, this kind of rigid man code about expectations and rules that I'd kind of adopted through growing up as a boy about what a good man is. A good man stoically continues at all costs. A good man is a gritter. He's not a quitter. A good man is a knight in shining armor who rescues damsels in distress. A good man is confident and successful. And if not, he certainly doesn't advertise the fact that he's not confident and successful. And so I think that man code is a reason. So for me, there's habit, lack of psychological safety, although I do think that's changing for everyone, not just guys. But I also think I refer to it as my man code. And I've adapted and evolved that over time. So even like, and I'll shut up in a minute because I know I'm hogging the airtime, but one slight shift that has really helped me is I no longer see myself in my family as the protector and the provider. I am a protector and a provider. In fact, my wife takes the lead on online protection because she's tech savvy and I'm not. So it would be ridiculous for me to say I am the protector. I am a protector. I am a provider. So I've made little shifts to my man code, which have helped me now moving forward. It's less of an issue for me.
Yeah, I love that, Andrew. That's really interesting. And I think when I think back to when I pushed myself to the limit and ended up physically, mentally, emotionally exhausted, it was because I was obeying the man code, right? Never show any weakness or vulnerability. Project this air of confidence, which actually was just false bravado and bullshit. And to keep going at all costs and to never even admit to myself, I'm struggling here. I'm finding this difficult. Something is not right. I just kept going and going and going until I couldn't anymore. And part of that was my drive to provide, right? So I created these personas. I had a home persona, I had a work persona, I had a friend persona, and they were all bravado. They were all me getting on the front foot to show how confident I was and to show what a strong man I was. because I was driven to provide. And I worked myself into the floor in an attempt to provide. And I think now that provide and protection, because that's within us, right, guys? This isn't something we can just put aside and pretend's not a thing. These are adaptive behaviors we've adopted as humans. But I think what we need to do now is start redefining what that means. What does provide mean? And actually, for me now, it's providing my whole self. It's being present. It's listening. It's spending proper time with the people I love, with my family and with my friends, making connections and having a community. Because, again, when I think back to my man code, it was do it all alone. Shoulder all your own burdens. You've got broad shoulders. You're tough. And all that does is it just leads to isolation and loneliness. And I think that is part of what's going on and the hiding behind the I'm fine and why men are struggling so much. It's because they've severed the connection with themselves and who they genuinely are, and therefore severed the connection with other people. And we're humans, we're social animals, right? And that connection, that community is so important.
And I think there's a couple of things with this. So thanks so much for what both of you said. And I come from it, not only from my story, but I think of it as a therapist as well, that I think sometimes men are treated as a monolith. And so I'm listening to this idea of being a provider, but reading up on sort of the idea of precarious masculinity, it's this idea of this nebulous thing that is masculinity, trying to obtain it. So being the fastest, being the toughest, being the smartest, it's actually quite hard to get. And then when you get it, you've got to hold on to it. So that means you've got to provide, you've got to do it alone. But if you're one of the men that don't get it, and I probably would have put myself in that category, my story is one that was my story. But it's really interesting being a tall black man, yet not feeling masculine and going on a journey with that, and then sort of coming to it later. And I think it is redefining what masculinity is, broadening it so that actually, rather than people feeling it's this tiny thing that only the few get, actually, if you're born a man, you're man. If you are, if you identify as a man, you're a man, and that's it. And I think, therefore, what you do is masculine. And then that sets people free from feeling like they have to hold it all, or they have to be quiet, or they have to be fine. Because whatever they say, if they say they're not fine, that's masculine in itself. So I think there's all these things. And generationally as well, I was born in the early 80s. So I was raised by people who really had that stoic idea. But for the younger generations that I see, there's the internet. So that comparison of, I'm not just comparing to my schoolmates, I'm comparing to someone in the States, I'm comparing to someone in India, I'm comparing to someone halfway around the world. And now the pool is so much bigger and there's so many more people to compare to. So there's so many more voices. So I think there's a lot of that going on as well.
Yeah, I love that concept of broadening what masculinity is. And even if I just think of myself, my pursuits, hobbies, you might consider to stereotypically manly. I like to jump off stuff, play football, be in the pub, and at home I'm most often found on my chin-up bar. But you put a very slightly soppy movie on, I will weep buckets. My wife will be sitting there thinking, what's wrong with him? It's not even sad. And yeah, but I'm just so happy. I'm so emotional. And so I think that for me is a really important thing, that we kind of model that and we encourage that in our boys. It's not this tight, narrow thing. It's a broad thing, right?
Whereas I'm terrified of heights. I cannot fix anything. I can't. I'm the most.
I'm rubbish at DIY as well, Ollie.
No.
You're rubbish. I'm so happy to meet someone else that's rubbish at DIY. Yeah. That has hurt me as a man. Terrible. That has hurt. Good men are not rubbish at DIY.
No, same here. I can change a tire on a bike, but that's that's about it. But it's interesting. Like if I'm trying to do some DIY, it's interesting. Invariably something doesn't quite go to plan, and I feel deeply ashamed. And then I'm quite frustrated and angry at myself for this kind of thing, and it's interesting. Like this is was a wonderful thing about this conversation, because again, you suffer in the so I call it the man
you
box,
don't
but,
share that shame
yeah.
with anyone,
you-
right, Ed?
you have these rules which you've these rules that you've just learnt, inhibited, they've been put upon you almost, and it's actually really, really damaging unless we realize we've set these rules upon ourselves and can step away from them. And I love the idea that actually there's a whole sphere of what it is to be a man, and there's a dot of that is for stereotypes, and actually whatever you want it to be, I guess this is more of a solution to it. You are perfectly fine being yourself and being good at what you are good at and bad at what you're bad at, and that is fine. And there's 4 billion of us right across the world, and we're all different, and that's okay. There's so that was just really lovely to hear that, and that's a great bit of sharing, I think. Paul, you
Going back to that DIY. Sorry, going back to that DIY point. Does anyone else feel compelled for some reason to help another man who is doing some sort of DIY, even if they haven't asked?
I have a story in where I work. The dishwasher wasn't working, and there was like 4 of us stood around like looking at it. None of us knew what we were doing, but we all thought, "Let me help." I was just there to bring the hype.
Yeah, come on.
None of us could fix it.
I'll tell you what, I've had so we've had builders in over this summer, and at the moment I'm laying flooring through our house, right? Good DIY stuff, manly stuff, right? But I will not do it when there are builders here. I need to be by myself doing that, because it's that shame thing. It's like, if I do something wrong, which I know I'm going to do, obviously, I cannot stand other people look at me going, he's making a mess of that. So I can't do it. I have to go away and do it myself. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah, and I think shame, this is a big thing, right, Jamie? This is why men hide behind the I'm fine. This is why I created that false bravado, because I was ashamed of the fact that I wasn't coping. I looked around me at all the other men with their false bravado and think, well, he's got it together. He's absolutely fine. Because, we don't talk about this stuff, because it's really difficult to talk about this stuff. I imagine every one of us in this room has been vulnerable at some point and had it used against us, or had it thrown back in our faces, or, missed out on opportunities because we put our hands up and said, oh, actually, do you know what? I'm struggling a bit here. And I think this is the thing, right? This is why as men, we struggle silently, because we think it's just us. And one of the most powerful things about the community that I've created, very early on, when in the WhatsApp group, suddenly all the guys were saying, oh, wow, it's not just me. It's not just me that struggles. It's not just me that gets anxious. It's not just me that can't switch off. It's not just me that wakes up at 3 o'clock in the morning going, oh my God, did I send that email? It happens to all of us. And we've been conditioned by society to feel this, as Andrew called it, the man coder. And I know Ed talks about the man box, to try and fit into this very narrow idea of what being a man is and what masculinity is. And it's a phrase I don't like, because I think it's been co-opted and it's used to beat men up. Toxic masculinity. And this is when we're trying to we're bending ourselves out of shape to fit into this idea of what we think a man is. And what happens is we then become consummate liars. And we don't like lying. Our bodies get stressed when we lie. So what I was doing was constantly lying to myself, to everybody else, to keep up the bravado and to fit into this idea of what it meant to be a man. And that's really stressful. So that just made my mental and emotional health even worse, because there's a reason why we fail lie detector tests, because it stresses us to lie. So if we are not being ourselves, if we are performing a version of ourselves to make ourselves acceptable, to try and get ahead in business, to try and make some more money, to try and provide and protect, as that's what the culture's told us it wants from us. Plus we have those innate masculine drives. This is why we end up chronically stressed and anxious.
I think you're dead right in the, sorry.
No, go, please, go.
I think you're dead right with the fact that men don't talk about it and they say I'm fine is the most damaging thing in itself, because Yeah, even speaking personally, I started my podcast as an experiment because I didn't know if this was just me going through this stuff. What has surprised me the most in the last year and a half since I've been doing that is the number of guys who have said to me privately, I thought it was just me. And it's just like everyone thinks this, but it's because if everyone says I'm fine, then you look around at everyone going, yeah, I'm fine. So what are you supposed to do with that? You know, I think it's the most damaging thing. I really do.
Yeah. So, Olu, you were going to say something. I'll jump in after.
No, you go first, and then I'll jump after you. Honestly, yeah, go. Please.
What I would just say this, I know we're not in solutions mode, but one thing that's helped me, I used to batter myself about the fact that I'm a technological wally when it comes to technology. It's the one thing that had me raging and swearing. The neighbors genuinely must think they've got a crazy man living next door to them. But what's helped me recently is wherever I've got a technical problem now, which is often, I go onto Google and say, does anybody else struggle with, and put the problem in, and there's just forums full of people, men as well, struggling with the same stuff that I struggle with. So for me, that's helped me now in that department of my life. Wherever I've got a problem, to see how many other people, it's not just me. There isn't a conspiracy against me, and I'm not an idiot. There's just other. So that's how that has helped me. That kind of sense of trying to find other people. There's always a million other people that struggle with the same stuff that you struggle with. And I try and use that as a mantra now. But yeah, Olu, sorry, I cut across you.
No, you didn't at all, not at all. And I also been thinking about, a friend of mine wrote a book on the idea of masculinity. It's this idea that over time, in different cultures and in different times in life, what was masculine was very different. There was a point that wearing heels was masculine, in certain times. And I think when we talk about masculinity, it's all determined by who is the person that says what is and isn't masculine. And I think that goes back to the original idea of broadening the idea that actually it's masculine not to understand things. It's masculine. And I think we have these innate ideas, and they come from our parents, they come from our friends, they come from what we see on TV. So for me, Mr. T was the epitome of masculinity, this big guy with these big chains. I have these ideas of, right, that's the man. And I think, how do we dismantle that? And not necessarily dismantle it because it's all bad, but in a way that is helpful to us.
Another element of Mr. T's is obviously he's violent as well, isn't he? That's part of the and I think that's maybe one thing that would be helpful just to touch on, because that's part of this masculine sort of stereotype, is being strong and the ability to basically be violent, to either defend yourself or attack someone physically. There's a degree of this that sort of resides, which I think actually is in all of us to some degree. If you get threatened enough, there'll be some sort of response along those lines. But one variation on that, because I've got introverted, I've become very aware of this, is the violence may be directed inside. So often there's very negative sort of self-talk, which again no one sees, right? This is part of the I'm fine. So often, to go back to the trying to put up a shelf, I'm useless, I'm a failure, I'm pathetic. This kind of stuff I would hear, which actually I have worked on a fair bit. We'll come on to maybe a solution there in a second. But these thoughts can really just plague you, especially if you're feeling very low. Especially if your life is not going particularly well. A solution, it sounds, it doesn't sound like it would actually work, but just what I call a wins diary. So this orange book here is my success book. Each day I'll write down 3 things that have gone well. And and I've done this now probably for a couple of years, and it just starts to change how you think about each day. So, and it can be very easy things like, I made myself a cup of coffee. I went out for a walk in the park. I had a nice conversation with my daughter. Stuff like this, right? Which it doesn't have to be I made millions of pounds or I got promoted or any of this kind of stuff. It can be very, very small things. But the more we practice seeing the world sort of our world in a positive light, because lots of good stuff happened today. He eased the tone of my thought has gradually changed over the past couple of years. Well, probably 6 years or so, really, since I've been after my own burnout. So it is possible to change, to move away. Sorry, I've interrupted.
Can I ask,
anyway,
can I ask a question to you guys? So you guys work with as coaches or with groups of men quite a lot. You talked about self-belief and self-worth there. Just as an open question, do you guys find that lack of self-worth, lack of self-belief is exceptionally common? I'm kind of leading that, I suppose. But
and this is how it manifests, Paul, right? This is how hiding behind the I'm fine manifests, creating this false bravado. And it's false, right?
Yeah.
And, you know, when I first started my business, I talked to a lot of men. And I set up saying I was a confidence coach. And every one of them came back to me, I don't have any problem with confidence. Yes, they did. But were they going to admit it? No, they weren't. And yeah, this poor self-worth means we start to bend ourselves out of shape even more. And the negative self-talk there that Ed's talking about, that ruins your self-worth. It is not funny to call yourself names and to talk to yourself in a way that you would never talk to anybody else. It is incredibly damaging. And not only that, Paul, but self-trust and self-respect. These are two as well. And if we're creating a version of ourselves, if we're pretending that we're fine, we lose respect for ourselves. We lose trust in ourselves. And this is what creates stress and anxiety. It causes us to overthink. It means we procrastinate. It means we seek perfection. And we get stuck in that stuff. And we're just no longer being ourselves. And that disconnection, it causes us, you know, real anxiety, that feeling of dread. We've all been there. We all know what it's like in the solar plexus. And now what men do is they numb. What I did when during burnout, thank you, Andrew. Andrew's left us. He's a busy man today. What I did was I laid my hands on any short-term pleasure I could get, because I'd put these walls up, right, to protect me from things, emotions and feelings I didn't like. And so I reached for anything where I could feel something. So I took drugs. I drank a lot. I ate terrible food. I gambled. I did all these things that were really unhealthy just to make me feel better in the moment. And the other thing that men tend to do when they've ignored and repressed and kept going, and when they're suffering from really poor self-worth, is they blow their lives up. They quit a job out of nowhere. They have an affair, or they go and spend all their money on some wonderful car. And again, it's just about that, trying to increase our status, trying to prove where we are in the hierarchy, rather than just accepting and being ourselves.
But I also wonder, just going back to something you said about, would we talk to other people the way we talk to ourselves? And I wonder, actually, sometimes we do. So sometimes in friendship groups, we call it banter, but we're just tearing each other to shreds sometimes. And one thing, I come from a family, we take each other to task. We know how to, and it all is genuinely meant in jest. But I'm a lot more thoughtful in how I speak to my friends, because one, I may not know what's going on with them. And so something that I think is funny may not be funny because it could be speaking into something that I don't know about. But also that art of, wait a minute, am I speaking to myself in a way that I wouldn't agree with speaking to someone else? And then just the second thing that you said, sometimes when people are experiencing low mood, anything to feel something. So all those things you were talking about, having an affair, gambling, drinking. So some of the clients that I've worked with, it's been about, I feel nothing. So by doing these things, I feel something. And so sometimes men can get themselves into situations and people around them like, why have you done this? And almost becomes a blot on their character, but actually they're in that survival mode, and that's what can happen to us. And so how do we build those connections where people can be honest, and also be honest about these are the things that I'm doing and I don't even know why I'm doing them.
I would love to jump in here and just go back to this conversation with friends thing, because that's just something lit up in my brain. Why are we so bad as men about having open, honest conversations with other men? I think that every man has had this experience. They go home to their partner asks them how an individual they've just spoken to is, how their job's going, how their life is going, and we haven't got a clue. We have no idea what is actually going on in their lives. Why don't we have honest conversations with our mates?
For me, Jamie, again, it's sorry, Ed. I'll defer to you in a second, mate. It's because we're obsessed with hierarchy and status, and again, that's wired in us. It's an adaptive behaviour as human mammals, because it served us, when we walked the plains, when we were very tribal beings, and it doesn't serve us anymore. And I think it's again that thing that Andrew talked about earlier, the man code, right? We don't admit that we're struggling. We don't ever hold our hands up and say that we think something's wrong. And often if there is, or we have done something, we're ashamed. So therefore, we don't feel we can share it. We do not want our status reduced in the eyes of our friends. And it's habitual, Jamie, right? And I'm now very open, very honest, especially with myself and with others. But I still do that. I'll sit on the phone for an hour with my brother, and my wife will say to me, well, how is he? Well, I didn't actually ask him, but I can tell you what he thinks about the new West Ham manager. I can tell you what he thinks about the Labour government, and I can tell you what he's doing at work.
Yeah.
I've got a buddy like this, actually. Sorry, Paul. Sorry.
No, go on.
I've got a mate who I've known since I was 12, 13, and me and him didn't have a serious conversation until we were 34. And it was after a wedding. One of my best mates in the world. After a wedding, we sat in a jacuzzi till 4 a.m. and we talked, like actually talked. We talked about some of the traumas we'd experienced. We talked about past relationships and why they failed. We talked about relationships that we had with family members. He talked about his kid. He talked about his partner. I talked about mine. It was the most unbelievably raw thing. And we realized in that moment, we'd known each other for 20 years, but we didn't actually know each other that well. And so I guess my question is, how do we encourage people to, like other guys, especially younger guys, to start having more open conversations? Paul, sorry, mate.
Well, I was going to say, I think there's a reciprocity thing here where even if you open up to someone else, if you get nothing back, it's kind of difficult to then keep opening up to that person. I think because you don't want to be that guy, in inverted commas, who's always moaning or has always got something to say or is not feeling great when everyone else is talking about the West Ham manager. Do you know what I mean? So even if you take that first step, which I've encouraged a lot of guys to do, I have to say, and some of them have come back to me and said, Jesus Christ, I had this conversation with my mate, which I've never had, exactly like you're saying. And I do think that most of the time, if you open up to someone who you trust, they will open up back to you. But there is a bit of a reciprocal thing there. You're putting your trust in someone if you do that. So you need to feel that you're going to get that trust back. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think Andrew called it psychological safety, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a study on exactly this, Paul, where they grouped male responses into 4 groups, and basically on if you show vulnerability, and one was basically you get kicked out of the group if you show vulnerability, and say it's like a hyper masculine sports kind of thing. We just go cycle, just play sport, and if you show some vulnerability, there's a chance that essentially you're ostracized and shunned from the whole thing. So you lose whatever it is you have in there in the first place. which obviously is not necessarily helpful. The second approach was just relying on women for psychological help. So most people will be able to talk to a sister, their mum, something like this aunt or whatever, where it's just built-in safety there. Although, Andrew gave the example of being in an abusive relationship. Three, and I've forgotten what the fourth one is, but the third is essentially where you get reciprocity. You get exactly what you described. And I guess in terms of ways I've found of getting that, obviously I've become incredibly skilled at conversations through being a GP and through this kind of work. But one is a sort of dipping your toe in kind of statement. Things are a bit hard for me, and someone has to go first. This is the other thing. So it may get completely ignored, which may be this people actually I can't handle this. I don't have the ability, space. This is breaking the bit. You don't know, but you can sort of gently go with it. And if you get pushed back, fine. I guess you know where that relationship probably stands. One other thing I've noted is I tend to refine my friendships now to ones which are very basically sort of sports or very deep and meaningful. And the deep and meaningful ones, often it takes 45 minutes or an hour almost before the real meat comes out. The real big problems start to come out. It doesn't come out. So there's a sort of gradual lowering of guard from both people. And I had exactly like it was being said. I had exactly this. So how old am I now? 45. I'm speaking to a school friends we've been friends nearly for 35, 40 years, and we were talking about our relationships, and that was only a few months ago, and that had been the most open, honest conversation about both of our relationships that we've had in probably ever, and it was okay. This is really interesting. This is like we're deeply connected here, and we're deeply being honest with each other, and it's hard to achieve that. I think some of it is time. Some of the problem is time. So it's talking aloud. You need time for yourself, time for the other person.
Yeah.
One-to-one works better than groups. Those are some thoughts, and just going gently rather than full pelt.
I guess I'm the unique person here because of my job, and I learned that my personality is I can't stand small talk. I find it important. I can't do it. And also because I'm a therapist, people will sometimes their opening gambit is let me tell you every thing. And I was like, I'm in the queue at Tesco. Like I just want to get my cabbage. So, but I think the thing that I've learned is that one, there's a time and a place for everything. So sometimes, you know what, those conversations about football and politics are really good because actually it's about building connection and building trust, and also it's knowing where the other person's at. So there's that dynamic of I might need support with what's going on between us here, and then two, I think one-on-one is better, or a small group where you've known each other for a long time and you can do that dip my toe in, because more often than not, if you're really close to someone, they probably have stuff they've been wanting to say to you. And it's also knowing how you communicate. So is it that I grew up eye contact? Some people struggle with eye contact. So even my wife and I, we have our best conversations in the car because we can't do eye contact. And therefore, so some people, eye contact, if you're sat in front of them, that won't happen. But if you go on a walk with them, all of a sudden things start to open up. So it's knowing those things. Are you someone that eye contact's too intense? In which case, having a conversation, go for a walk, go do something, and then you can talk. Or is it, I'm like this. I like dinner. I like going for a drink. I like doing something where we're sat and the purpose is to have conversation. So sometimes there's no response because they communicate differently, not because they don't care.
Yeah.
The walk-in thing's interesting. I don't know that there is a psychological thing around this as well, where men will not talk facing each other.
Shoulder to shoulder, Paul. Yeah.
Right, exactly. And if you watch two men talking, and I've experienced this, face to face, face on doesn't work. I went to a party not long ago. I was talking to this guy, and he kept moving around to my side. And I was sort of then moving round to face him, and he was moving, and you'll end up going around in this bloody circle, trying to have this conversation. It's because the direct eye-to-eye contact wasn't the way he wanted to talk to me. I only realised this afterwards, but it's interesting.
When it was too late.
Exactly.
You've been chasing him round.
Exactly. Going around this room in a flipping circle, getting faster and faster. But I think there's also something else in this which we haven't really talked about. But I am pretty sure that some of the hiding behind "I'm fine" and saying "I'm fine" is because a lot of guys genuinely have no idea what's going on in their head or how they actually do feel. So if you say to a guy, "How do you feel?" and he says, "I'm fine," yes, it might be a conscious or subconscious not wanting to talk about it for shame or weakness or whatever. But it actually could be that he has genuinely no idea how he's feeling because he never thinks about that.
Yeah, and just doesn't have the language either, Paul. So a lot of my work that I do one-on-one with guys, and I do this deliberately, I constantly ask them how they feel. And when they're telling me about this, that, the other, I say, "And how do you feel about that?" And some of them are pretty good, but most of them don't have the language. They can tell me what they think about how they feel, but they can't actually name the feelings. And I think this is important, right? Because when you see a lot of the mental health literature and advice, and some of it's very good, but some of it will just say, "Oh, men need to talk more, need to open up." Yes, they do, right? But in the right time, in the right way, to the right people.
Absolutely.
And I think the very first thing to do is to get really super honest with yourself and to learn how to name your feelings and emotions, to let them in, to stop pushing them away and escaping and avoiding them, and to educate yourself about how to describe how you are feeling so you can communicate it to other people. I think this is so important because in the generation I was brought up in, I was not taught how to talk about how I feel. In fact, I was exemplified that we just don't do it. My emotions and my feelings are no use to me. It's fluffy thinking. It's all about logic and reason. So yeah, I grew up that way. I couldn't tell you how I felt, and I've had to learn that. I've had to get the language. I've had to read books and listen to podcasts and get that language so I can express myself. And then I've had to learn there's a time and a place to do that. There are times, when I suddenly got really honest with myself, I became this chronic oversharer. And I suddenly realized, actually, not everybody wants to and needs to know everything that's going on for me.
Yeah.
And the good thing is there are places now where you can do that. There are communities where you can do that. And, as we talked about there, men often like to be doing, to be in action, and to be shoulder to shoulder. Not everybody wants to work with me one-on-one and sit across from me and talk in that way. Some of them, they would prefer to be doing things. I'm about to start doing walk and talk coaching with my new business because I know that actually for some, being out in nature for a kickoff, but being side by side as equals means we can have a conversation where there isn't any shame and there isn't any guilt because there isn't any hierarchy.
I think there's another thing as part of my research. I looked at the idea of alexithymia, which is the lack of understanding of one's own feelings. And that is rife with men. Sometimes it can be a psychological and neurological thing. And other times it's, as you were saying, Dan, people are so clogged up because they've been told they have to push it down that they've never engaged with their feelings. And I guess I want to bring back the point that I was saying before was absolutely there are men who want to be doing something, men who want to be side by side, but there's also men who like that front to front conversation that may have felt that they don't fit into the stereotype. And I think, I'm an advocate for therapy. it's not always for everyone. So I'm not here to say the only way you can do that is through therapy. But some people, that is helpful because it's a private space where they don't know anyone, the person there, and the therapist will gently take them through on that journey of learning to understand themselves. I know when I went to therapy as part of my training, I discovered things about myself that I didn't know because there was someone who was objectively just reflecting back what they were hearing and just noticing things that I didn't notice. And sometimes you can do that with a friend. There's ways in terms of, there's all sorts of ways that can happen. But I think I also want to take a note of those who may not have the time to sit with podcasts and things like that. Actually, it is, even if it's 10 minutes, even if it's 5 minutes, just sitting, there's exercises with dialectical behavioral therapy. There's all sorts of exercises, even if it's just a few minutes. Like Ed was saying, write some things down. It doesn't have to make sense. And it doesn't have to be a long thing, but even just starting to chip away, there's all sorts of things that we can do depending on your time, depending on what's available to you. But starting off small, I think, is because it can feel like a massive mountain, but just starting off small can really have a big effect.
I would love to just continue.
Really good. Oh, carry on. Sorry, Jamie.
Sorry, Ed. I'd love to continue this topic of resistance to any form of mental health intervention, professional intervention. I had this quite severely when I was going through what I was going through in my 20s. The idea of speaking to someone was horrific to me. And it wasn't until my buddy, who was the only person in the world that knew I was struggling, gave me permission to speak to a mental health professional, that I reached out and started getting therapy. So I don't know necessarily if I'm hitting on a solution there, but I think providing an environment in which your mates can go, I'm struggling, and then maybe going, well, it's okay to speak to someone. It's okay to speak to a professional, I think was the most insanely powerful thing for me. I don't know if any of you other gents have had some form of intervention at some point.
Yeah. I mean, I'm currently doing some psychotherapy just because it's helped unpick a huge amount of stuff that I've not unpicked yet in the last 6 years or so. And it's really helped me look at myself. It's in a more compassionate way. It's also unpicked a huge amount of hidden mess that kind of is I think we all actually carry this burden. Yeah. There's an analogy I like to use of someone you've got a rucksack with rocks in it, but it's not you. Someone else is like putting all his rocks in all the time, and then it's just so heavy. You come to the point. This is for sort of resistance, I think. So heavy, you can't even lift the straps to take it off. And a therapist is great because they just reach in and go, well, here's a rock. Let's look at that together. What's that about? And let's do another one. And then eventually you can take it back off once you've sort of upskilled yourself. But I think it's analogous to the DIY thing. The DIY thing is, I'm a man. I should be able to solve my own problems. I should be able to do this thing. I should know all about it. And of course, if you're me, you're ignorant of DIY because no one's ever taught you anything. You get stressed easily and become clumsy, and things go wrong, and it just gets stressed out, and the whole thing's terrible. Same thing with psychological help. There's people that spend years learning how to do the job, and you're starting from a point of no understanding at all of yourself, which is fine because that's how we all start, right? Probably we get a worse thing essentially because we cut ourselves off, I think, in childhood. But essentially, we don't understand ourselves. We don't understand anything about psychology or how our internal workings work. So how on earth would you try and solve any of this? It just doesn't make any sense. Of course, a great solution is to seek some sort of appropriate help. Or even the self-help stuff is great. There's another book on my shelf I like to share with people. James Hall, a Nottingham-based psychotherapist, he's written this book called The Secret Lives of Men, and it's absolutely jam-packed with the stuff we've been talking about today, and it's actionable, full of, each chapter has exercises Feelings wheel is a good one for stuff you were just talking about earlier. Looking at, if you go on, there's a web page, Feelings Wheel. It's got about 100 or so kind of emotions. Just looking at those, just knowing the names of them, picking 2 or 3 each day to try and describe how you're feeling beyond simply good or bad or sad or mad. Then that is really powerful stuff.
And I think that's the most important thing, Ed, isn't it? What you and Oliver touched on there is getting to know ourselves, having something or someone to hold the mirror up, because there's so many blind spots. There's so much stuff floating around in our psyche that we don't even know is there. And, our conscious mind only directs 3% of what we do. 97% of what we do is unconscious. Now, we've programmed that all, and mostly not deliberately. And we need to shine the light of awareness on that to really get to know ourselves. When Paul said earlier about, the problems with lack of self-worth and lack of self-belief, that all comes from not knowing ourselves, not knowing what we really care about, why we really care about it. We've followed society's path to success or what it means to be a man. And we've, as you said there, Ed, we lose connection with ourselves from childhood. So there's some rebuilding to be done. And the important thing, and I think where therapy is so good, and I've had both therapy and counselling before I got heavily into coaching. I'm now a coaching evangelist, and of course I am, is healing. We all have psychological and emotional wounds that we carry from our childhood, not necessarily from abuse and neglect. A lot of it just came from when things in internal conflict, where we followed our inner guidance. It said this was the right thing to do. And then someone in authority said, no, that's the wrong thing to do. And you're bad for doing it. And we walk away from that as children because we don't have the life experience to discern. And we're not wise, thinking there's something wrong with us. So we then invent all these thought processes and things to protect us. And it's this that we need to start unlearning. It's this stuff that we need to unpick. And there are great ways you can do that by yourself. Ed, you mentioned there your journaling. Journaling is a great way to write out your thoughts and feelings. But I would absolutely recommend getting some sort of support, whether that is counselling, whether that is therapy, whether that is coaching, whether that's reaching out to somebody that you trust, to hold the mirror up so you can see the things about yourself that you can't see. And then you can start to really get to know yourself. A good clue about getting to know yourself is, what were you passionate about as a child? What lit you up? What are the activities that you do where time just stops because you're so deeply present in the moment? And when you connect back to that stuff and you start to prioritize it in your life, you'll feel better. Then your worth gets better. And as your worth increases, then you can increase the sort of work you're doing. You can go deeper still and get maybe some psychotherapy or some cognitive behavioral stuff, or get yourself a coach who's going to hold the mirror up for you and get you into action. Get you prioritizing your well-being. First comes the healing, because we will not prioritize our well-being until we're healed. We'll keep sabotaging ourselves. Guys, when you sit there and you think, I'm not disciplined enough, I'm not committed enough. It's not true. What's happening is you've got stuff floating around in your psyche that's tripping you over, and it's stopping you, and it's blocking you, and it's getting in your way. And until you shine the light of awareness on that, until you do that bit of healing from the emotional and psychological wounds, you're not going to be able to do the things daily that are going to make you feel better.
I will also add on to that, for people listening, for what I say to clients when I sit with them is that just be prepared for things to get worse before they get better. So often we have built structures to cope, and those structures work fine until they don't work fine. And then when we start to dismantle them, what is revealed is what's underneath the structures, the thing that we're trying to hold up. So sometimes people start to feel worse and they're like, oh no, this isn't working, or no, I don't want to do that. And so I just give people a heads up to say, whatever support you enter into, be prepared that things may feel like they're getting worse. What that is the truth being revealed, and the things that you've been trying to hold together are no longer being held together. But actually it's worth going through that, and there is another side to it. I think we would be remiss if we say, right, go get support, and then people are like, well, I listened to those people, I got support, and things got worse, so I left. It's okay if things feel like they get worse. It's because the true emotions, the true thoughts are coming to the forefront.
Yeah, I love that, Olu, and that's very important. And it's often something that I talk to when men sign up to work with me one-on-one. And the first call I do is I say, this is going to be tough. And there are going to be times where you're going to want to punch me in the face, but that's okay. And, it'll be an emotional roller coaster. And there'll be some things you break through and you'll think, oh, wow, this is great. I'm off and running. But then actually it's like a glass of water, right? Oh. And our psyche's like a glass of water with some sediment in the bottom. You give the glass of water a shake, the sediment comes up, and it's not going to feel good. Olu's right. It often doesn't feel good to let these things in and let them out. But actually, boy, when you do, is it liberating?
I think that it's almost the perfect way to end this in a way. We've looked at how we can kind of solve this issue internally, things that we can do ourselves. We've looked at what our closest colleagues and family could maybe do, how they could present themselves and position themselves in a context that we feel comfortable with, or we could position ourselves in a place that they feel comfortable with. Like Paul's example of chasing someone around a party. We've talked about external intervention from a professional, which I think is really great because it's something that's really helped me. And Dan touched on something interesting a few chats ago, which I want to sort of finish on, was with this idea of men finding play again. I got married in April in Thailand, and their New Year festival is a water festival. And essentially what happens is every single person gets a water pistol and they have a giant water fight with thousands of people. Now, all of my wedding guests came, and the ones that by far were enjoying themselves the most, that just completely regressed back to when they were a kid, were the older boys, the older lads. They just turned into children again. And it was the most incredible thing to see. And afterwards, a couple of them came up to me and they said, listen, I haven't had that much fun in years. And so that's kind of my message to finish off is don't resist that fun. Don't resist play. Like, find the things that do light you up and go after them. But that's it, guys. Thank you all so much for coming, and thanks for this conversation. Thanks to everybody who wrote into the comments. I'll do my best to get back to all of you at some point. We will be sending a recording of this episode out to everyone that originally registered, but also you'll be able to just click back on this link and watch it back or share it with someone that you know. So thank you so much, gents.
Cheers, Jamie. Thanks for organising.